name is Jenny, and I'm a wife and mom raising 2 kids. But I used to live a more glamorous life as a TV reporter. I was on the nightly news interviewing pop stars and politicians. So when I said goodbye to TV and hello to motherhood, I suddenly discovered what we moms are up against. We live in a world that tells us to be rich and famous, thin and successful. You know, almost nobody says, "Oh, hey, you're a mom? That's fabulous." But you are fabulous, and I'm here to tell you why.
It's the Channelmom Show, celebrating you with Jenny Dean Schmidt.
Welcome back to the Channelmom Show, where we are celebrating you on Mile High Sports Radio, AM 1510, FM 93.7. I am your host, Jenny Dean Schmidt. I chose our next guest because it's almost the new year, and people tend to make all kinds of big goals for how they're going to grow and improve. And sometimes those goals have something to do with their spiritual lives. So that is why we invited Tyler Edwards to be on the show today. Tyler happens to love cheesy horror films and is particularly fond of movies like Dawn of the Dead, The Signal, and 28 Days Late. But Tyler also has a theory that modern churches look a lot like those horror films full of zombies. Tyler does happen to be a pastor at Cornerstone Christian Church in Joplin, Missouri. That may be why he has the expertise to write about zombie churches. The book title, by the way, is Zombie Church: Breathing Life Back into the Body of Christ. Welcome, Tyler, today to be with us right here before the new year.
Well, thank you.
All right, let's just bust out with the zombie movie theme. What are your favorites and why?
Well, one of my favorites is called The Crazies because it's got the main character makes intelligent decisions all the way through the movie. Most of the time, it's sort of like the plot is moved forward by people making stupid decisions like, hey, it's a dark hole, I'm going to go look in it. Really? Like, come on. But it's a movie where it actually has an intelligent plot and the character makes reasonable decisions, and yet still stuff goes bad. And I really actually like the TV series The Walking Dead that AMC is doing.
And why do you like it?
It's got this almost, like I'm not one of the crazy people that has like a zombie survival shelter thing under my house.
That's good to hear, Tyler.
Or anything like that. I think that's not what I'm writing about with it. But looking at it, just kind of going, in the hypothetical reality where something like that could happen and people did lose all their minds and started killing each other like that, it seems very real and very practical. And so I thought it was just interesting and it's just really well done. And so
yeah. Well, that's your little plug for that. But let me talk very briefly about why I had you on. I did some research this week about people in America and how they feel about God and how they feel about church. And I know you probably know this because you're a pastor, but over 90% of people in America still say that they believe in God. And something as many as 83% say they call themselves Christians. Now that varies depending on what you read. It can be 60 to 80% basically that say they're Christians. So people still have an interest in Jesus and in church and in following God. Yet many of them do stay away from church on purpose. And I'm thinking it could have something to do with your zombie theory. Tell people what you think about churches and why you equate it with zombieism in movies.
Well, a lot of times it's, there's a quote from Gandhi that just hit me really hard when I was younger, and he says, I like your Christ, but not your Christians, because your Christians are so unlike your Christ. Mm. And then DC Talk had a book that they did that said, that where they noted with a guy named Brennan Manning that the leading cause of atheism in the world today is Christians. Oh, and that had not been inconsistent with my experiences. Most of the people who I talked to who had a problem with God, had a problem with Jesus and faith and things like that, didn't actually have a problem with him, but about how his disciples, how his followers behaved.
Yeah.
And so I looked at that and I went, there's something missing here when the people who are claiming to love Jesus and want to follow Jesus are living in such a way that scares everybody else off. I mean, our lives should make a relationship with God more attractive, not less attractive. And it shouldn't be a stumbling block. It should be something that's like, well, for the people who don't believe, it should be like, I just have a hard time with this intellectually, but looking at these people's lives, I'm drawn to it.
Right,
but
right.
It's not been that. And so it's just kind of been, that's the big part of what zombies are in the mythology, at least, is it's living creatures, or it's dead creatures that are acting like they're living creatures.
Right.
And they have the appearance of life, and they act in many ways as if they're life, but they're not. And that's kind of what I was seeing in the churches, is places where people went and they talked, they said all the right things, and they did all the right little dances and motions, and they knew when to stand up and to sit down in the service, but when they walked out of the doors, they didn't act any more like Jesus than anybody else.
Right, it's kind of posing. It's counterfeit, and people see through that. Absolutely, absolutely. I want to get to a couple of things that you say that you put in your book that I was very intrigued by, because I think it's across culture that we find these things. You equate them with zombie movies, some of which you can find in the zombie movies, but then you go further and talk about how our culture has infected our church and has made us behave like zombies. 3 issues, and I want to draw them out, and I want to see what people in our audience think about them. Laziness, lack of commitment, and excess. And I'm going to give quick examples, Tyler, and then I just want you to go off on them. I want to hear your example of some people that you would continually find in churches that you worked for as a pastor that would come into you and express this extreme laziness and sense of entitlement that comes along sometimes in our culture. Secondly, lack of commitment. You cite a statistic that says that more people than ever are committing to things but then not showing up. And then finally, this excess problem we have, that we want to go out and buy more and more and more to make ourselves look better and better and better, but it never fulfills us. And that we're now in a world that is as obese as it is starving. You have this one with great statistic that says that as many people now, 1.4 billion or something, are as obese as there are starving, 1.4 billion starving. And that's just so ironic and sad that we have this problem with excess as much as we do with lack. So talk about the way in which that has affected the church body and infected the church body so that they cannot follow God or act like Jesus, as you would say, in ways that are compelling to people. I mean, in the end, especially on New Year's, people consider these things. They care. They care about their destiny. They care about how they live life. But these things keep them away from God in church. So tell me about that.
Well, the way I look at it is that God provides for people in different ways, and that he has a style that is designed to allow us to partner with him in being relational, because God is a relational God. The gospel's always been shouldered on relationships. And so I think a lot of times what God does is okay, everybody needs $1, so I'm going to give half the people $2 and half the people no dollars, so that the people with $2 can be blessed by sharing out of the excess that I've given them, and they can understand what it's like to share and to give and to be generous. And the other half can get to experience practically and personally the significance of being provided for and to be given to. And so both sides can be blessed and feel my connection and my love with this blessing. So he wires it that way so that we kind of get to participate with what he's doing, because, we're not robots that are just here to, play by certain rules and to follow these religious ritual routine deals. He wants us to be a part of what he's doing and to experience it. And so God sets it up for that distribution. And what happens is you get the people who have two, they're like, well, I must just be better. And so I'm going to start hoarding onto it. And they start wanting more and more and fighting for things that they don't need. Well, all around them, there are people who don't have the basic things that they do need.
And what about the laziness or the lack of commitment that we see that has infected our churches?
Well, to me, a lot of that seems just like we've lost that essential, because we've got so comfortable and we have so much stuff that distracts us, that we've lost the recognition of what's really important. 100 years ago, when a cause came along that you believed in, you would fight and die for it. You got people fighting for, their country and fighting for everything that they can get their hands on that they believe in. But now it's just, there's so much stuff, and it's like, well, I think some of it is just the media. There's a thing I talk about in the book called by a guy named Paul Lazarfield, which is called narcoticizing dysfunction.
Okay.
And that's the idea that the more we become aware of something, the less we care about it, because we confuse knowledge with action.
Yeah.
And so it's like, hey, they talked about it in the movie Hotel Rwanda. This hotel owner is really excited because all these atrocities are going on, and there's a cameraman filming it, and he goes, well, people will see this now and they'll help. And the guy says, honestly, you know what? I think people will see this, they're going to go, oh man, that's terrible, and then go right back to their cereal.
Yeah.
Because we have this almost like a survival instinct to sort of, because how do you watch something so atrocious and when knowing that you can't just immediately fix it? Well, you have to kind of, you naturally start to dismiss parts of it, and it gets to a spot where you just don't care. And you can look at a picture of a child who's starving to death, and it not even just take away your appetite.
Yeah, we become anesthetized because we're so bombarded and overwhelmed by digital images because we get so many now daily, constantly through our phones and computers and television, et cetera, that we do become anesthetized. It's frightening that we can't just have that real face-to-face relationship. What is the primary thing that you want to tell people about how this can change? Because I know there are people out there listening today that say there's no way I'm going back to church. I'd like to recommit to God in 2012, but I don't trust church people. How can we change this dynamic?
Well, I think the big thing is people have to have healthy expectations. And when you're looking at a group of people to be perfect and expecting them to do everything right and to always have the right attitude and always just know what to do and what to say, that's not a realistic expectation for anyone. Mm-hmm. And if people were to actually hold themselves to the same expectations that they held the church to, I think that would help them find a lot more realistic expectation for what the church can be and what the church can't be, because it's filled with imperfect people.
Right.
And just because, just because God's people who are trying to follow after Him imperfectly aren't perfect and they make mistakes, that doesn't mean that God does. And so we can't blame God for the mistakes of His people. And the big thing that gets me about it is that there is some merit with things that churches have. I mean, I've been to churches where I'm like, I can understand walking away from this. Mm-hmm. because of how these people act, because what's going on here. And I think the big thing is that we lose focus on what really matters. Is we get so focused on the to-do list, and it's like God created the world as a playground for us to run and to play and to enjoy. And with that, He did establish some perimeters of fence, essentially, to keep us safe so that we don't hurt ourselves, like you would with children playing in your backyard. It's nice to have a fence so they know how far they can safely go and they don't run out into the street and get run over by a car.
Right. Right.
And that's how God created the world. He goes, here, I've put up this fence, run, play, have a good time. And what the church kind of does, a lot of places, is that it builds walls around the fence, and then it puts sniper towers up and a moat with alligators in it, and it turns this playground that God gave us to enjoy into a prison cell. And sometimes you walk into a church and you just feel like the life is being suffocated out of you.
Right.
The priorities are wrong. It's about rules and rituals and making yourself look good enough, and it all becomes this competition, like our faith is a zero-sum game where one person's sin means you're a little bit closer to God by default. And that's not the right attitude. I mean, the purpose of the church is to follow Jesus and to learn to be like Jesus.
Right.
And its focus should always be about Jesus.
Right, and to give,
the cure.
To give and to forgive and to sacrifice in ways that He did. And I think sometimes we do get caught up in our modern culture, and our churches behave just like our modern culture and don't do
1 minute
of loving like Jesus did. How can people order your book, Tyler?
Well, it's on Amazon. They can get it there. It's also there's an e-version of it on Amazon that they can download for their Kindles. The publisher's website, Creeville Publications, has it. A lot of bookstores carry it. Barnes & Noble has it.
Awesome. Well, we got to let you go. Happy New Year, Tyler, and thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay.
30.
All righty. We don't have time for our Channel Mom tips for busy moms, which we got from a number of our viewers today, or some of our listeners, so we'll do those next week. You are listening to the Channel Mom Show, where we celebrate you, Mom, on Mile High Sports Radio. Next week, we're going to talk about how moms use their influence to make the world a better place. Please join us, and God bless you, and Happy New Year.